Welcome, everyone. Zach Arskadden here in our new renovated studio. I'll have Pastor Tim piped in here in a second. And today we want to cover the topic of involving the talks around then we want to dive into how we can pray as intercessors, and then also the looming meetings in the background that seem to be misforgotten with the Fed's meetings in Jackson Hole this week. We'll discuss all this and more on today's Pipeline Report. All right, welcome everyone. Again, Zach Arskadden flying with you solo today in our new studio, and hope to be able to do a behind the scenes look here at the end. So stick around with us as we go through today's episode and then dive in. I'm looking here in the chats. Obviously, we have some people here in Shreveport. Just so you know, we are on, and then we are also joined in from all across the country, from Kentucky to Tennessee to California, to even some down in Mansfield. And so today we want to talk about the topic of the day, which is the Trump, Ukraine, Russia talks. We talked about it a little last week, and I want to go ahead and pull up Pastor Tim's video about this, because he talked about this a little bit and gave a warning for us from Cindy Jacobs that I think is really important as we come into the leading up to the end of 2025 and the midterms in 2026. I'm going to dive into a few topics that will talk about this and how we want to pray about this, because I think this is the big thing is, okay, everybody's going to put their opinion, whether it be Fox News, CNN, and throw out some fear-mongering and just really leave you at well, this might happen, this may happen. Okay, now as believers, we want to take that and say, okay, Lord, this is what the world's publishers are saying. What are you saying, and how can we pray about that? So welcome in, everyone. I'm going to wait a few more minutes before we get going. And if you see our background here and our setup, this is all possible because you guys have given over 4 to 5 years, 5 years really, since COVID. And we've been saving up and renovating things around the church, and the money for this room came from all your givings for the media and hopefully we can be able to reach people who are yearning for a hope-filled message and how they can be involved, whether they're involved in politics, through prayer and intercession. So with that, I see a lot of people have joined in here. I'm going to go ahead and bring up Pastor Tim here and play his video, and so we can hear from him, because he's on a trip doing a conference in Colombia with our friends at La Casa and doing a Soberdosis conference, reaching the younger people there in Colombia. So I'll play his video, then I'll come back, and then we'll dive further into some more topics that lead up into our prayer lives.
Well, greetings, Pipeline family. Pastor Tim Arskadden here from Colombia. We're near Bogota. We've been doing a conference here with La Casa. Amazing conference with a lot of great people. Our friends, obviously, down here. Bishop Joseph Garlington's been with us as well, and many other speakers. We're just so excited what God's doing in this land. But I want to do a little quick report for you. Zach will be carrying the Pipeline Report today, but I want to bring a little bit, I think, a real serious warning I'm feeling from the Lord concerning some things. We have the Trump meeting today with Zelensky from Ukraine and all the other world leaders. There's many things that have come about, and the reason they're having this meeting. There's some alarming things on the meeting with Putin last week. in Alaska was dramatic, but really didn't come out with any full results yet. I know the Ukrainians are upset on how President Trump honored Vladimir Putin with the red carpet and all the honoring of a dictator that he is in the land. And so there's a lot of tension. Zelensky and Putin hate each other. It was very clear in the meeting. That came out. But now we're in a place where people don't understand diplomacy, and Putin is a very egotistical man, very evil man, obviously, but you have to do certain things in diplomacy in order to get a breakthrough. You're trying to make peace here. Millions of people have died in this war, and we don't want to see any more die. I think that's a big thing that's going on there, and I think that's President Trump's heart. I know it's his wife's. You got to understand, she's from a nation that was controlled by Russia, Soviet Union at one time. So she has relatives, she has a history in her of knowing what it's like to live under that type of regime. And I know she's been somewhat of an influencer to President Trump. So let's pray for her, that God would use her history and her heritage of understanding what happens when you work with these type of tyrants, and not to be deceived by their words, but to be wise. Now, President Trump is a person that wants victories, wants wins. He wants to settle peace. A lot of people are stroking his ego right now about how many wars he stopped. We have to admit that he played a huge role in all of those roles, and maybe nobody else in the world could have done that. I believe God has used him that way. But I want to frame that God used him. We know that God is a God of peace. He's the Prince of Peace, and that he's the one that brings that about. And we trust him to use man to do that. But now you have these leaders. Now, everybody expected a ceasefire out of that gathering, and it did not happen. And many people believe that President Trump has capitulated. And that's why the European leaders are coming to Washington this week, or today, I should say, because they're alarmed that the ceasefire was not the main goal, and that President Trump has gone for the full end of the war. Their hopes were for peace. I knew UK had already announced that if a ceasefire was put in place, they would send troops to Ukraine, to secure the region, and that is not what Putin would ever allow. You can't have NATO forces on your border, knowing, and I'm not saying he's right. I'm just saying you have to think like he's thinking and understand that he's not going to allow that to happen. So that's what that issue is. So we need to pray today for wisdom as all these leaders gather. They're obviously going to try to push Trump towards supporting Ukraine fully against Russia. I'm not here to pick sides. I love Ukraine. I've been there many times, and I love that nation. He did make an announcement that Crimea was not on the table. That's the region that Russia took after 2014, and the peninsula. And that's always been a debated territory anyway throughout its history. It's never been clear who really owns it or should have authority there. So that's nothing, quote, new. Putin seems to want the areas they've already gained and doesn't want to lose any of those. So he's made that very clear. The Ukrainians want their regions back, understandably. But you got to remember, a lot of those people that live in the eastern region of Ukraine are of Russian descent. Many of them are pro-Russian. So you have a big issue. So if Ukraine takes them back, you're going to have pro-Russian people who've been fighting the war. So you have a whole issue there as well. It's very complicated in the natural. In the spirit, it's about territory. It's about rule. It's about authority. It's about princes controlling regions. And we know these are the end time principalities that rule those regions and ultimately want to come against Israel. The Russians had said this week they have real problems with what Israel's doing in Gaza and the territory, and I think it's extremely hypocritical concerning what they've done to a sovereign Ukraine. So that keep that caveat in your prayer watch, that remember that Russia and Gog Magog, the princes that are talked about in the book of Ezekiel, will one day turn against Israel. So we have to understand that that's what we're dealing with here. That's the principalities. We already had the Prince of Persia issue. Now we have this, and that. Speaking of that issue, there's rumblings again that there may be another war brewing between Israel and Iran. Iran has made statements this week that they are not at a ceasefire with Israel or America, and that at any time they can act out. And so we know that that's part of the process that they're going through right now as well. So as we move forward, we want to pray into that. I want to bring that update, pray today, especially for the negotiators, that we need to see an end to this war, and that innocent lives would stop being taken, children being kidnapped and taken, things like that. We've got to see an end to that as well. Well, I want to bring a quick update also. I just feel a burden in my heart about the Islamic spirit that I think is moving in the earth very strongly right now. And Cindy Jacobs gave a word about a year ago, well, not quite a year ago, I think, about this. And I felt to play it again because I felt like we need to pray into this, that we remember what she said and pray into this. So let's listen to this, and then let's pray afterwards, and I'll release it back to Zach here. Let me put this in here.
Okay. Word of the Lord for the nations. Do not think that the people who are protesting and calling for a Palestinian state are just protesting on behalf of Palestine. Whether they understand or not, there is an insurrection forming that is like unto the communist takeover in Russia for the downfall of the czars. Only this time, they are aiming for the nations of Canada, the U.S., and the nations of the world. Among the other nations, Europe is especially a target. This is a planned takeover, not only ideologically, but nationally. It has infiltrated militaries and is gaining strength. At the moment, they are quietly planning. There are proxies on the streets and protests. This is not only about bringing a Palestinian state to the Middle East, but an Islamic state to North America and other nations. They are subversive and even using misguided students, but the movement is on a much bigger and more pervasive scale. This Palestinian Islamic State is also part of a larger alliance of Iran as the head with a caliphate of Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. Hezbollah will be part of this axis of evil, and eventually Afghanistan, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Morocco, and other Middle Eastern nations will not be able to remain neutral, because you will one day be in the crosshairs of this caliphate or Middle Eastern takeover, and your independence will be threatened. Africa, choose the right side. Do not side against Israel in the battle. Russia is watching like a devourer to swoop down on Europe through Ukraine. China is being restrained through prayer against gobbling up Taiwan, Korea, and Asia. Even if these alliances work as an axis of evil, Islam will eventually break these alliances to take over. The insurrectionists are set in Paris, London, and other European cities, as well as in Australia and Latin America. However, the hand of God is waiting to cover those nations who are on their face in repentance and holiness. Judgment has begun at the house of God and will increase. There may appear to be a severity in the cleansing of the church. There will be no wiggle room for those who think that.
And I wanted to just kind of stop there. She goes into a whole nother topic, which I think is very important, but I do want to focus on what she just shared there, because I think this is the big issue we're dealing with right now. And if you saw the not riots, they were very vocal parades, as well as gatherings and rallies in New York and Michigan, where some of the largest, Dearborn is one of the largest Muslim communities in America, mainly full of Hezbollah Shiite background people, which is Iran. Much of what Cindy said there, some of what Cindy said, has already been fulfilled. Iran being the caliphate instigator of most of this. That's why God intervened, I believe, with the attacks on Iran to deal with that. And so we thank God for that. But right now, I think this is an important issue that we have to pray about. I've already given my dream. I shared with you many times on this platform where I saw that this movement would come about, and Hamas and these other entities would begin to spread their propaganda. Now, they are winning the propaganda war. All the world filmed this woman, they said died of malnutrition, starvation. They flew her to Germany, tried to save her life. It went all over the international medias. This is what Israel's doing to these people. Now, in Israel and in other small outlets, they knew who this woman was. She had leukemia. She was about to die anyway. And they used her as a propaganda piece. And this is the sad part, because you don't have retractions. In other words, it goes out in the media, the talking points go forth, and then the left and the communists and the Islamic radicals begin to talk about it this way. And they use it. And as I played last week, Prime Minister Netanyahu has admitted that he is losing the propaganda war, that the sentiment is coming against Israel. Now, this is demonic. It's part of the Antichrist spirit. It's also part of an end-time movement. So there's a lot of things happening in the spirit realm that are occurring that way. But right now in America, it seems like, okay, well, that's distant. I don't live in Michigan. I don't live in those communities. But if you go to certain places in Texas and other places of the country, you're seeing them, because they're so community-minded, Muslims are, that they will begin to commune together, begin to buy up properties, begin to build communities and neighborhoods. And next thing you know, they'll take over the city councils, the potential of Sharia law coming into place, etc. This is what starts happening. And it is a spirit of the Antichrist. I don't want to just focus on Muslims. I want to focus on the Antichrist spirit that I believe is moving strongly in the earth right now. And in America, it's growing rapidly. And with the Free Palestine movement, which I think is demonically charged, it is growing in leaps and bounds, and they're winning the propaganda war. And that's what we need to pray against. We need to pray that that propaganda war fail and we win that battle, and that truth prevail, and the motives of the hearts, which the Lord knows, will be revealed. I want you to pray with me, stand with me on that today. I'll turn it over to Zach here. He'll cover the other topics that I think are important today as well. God bless you. Thank you for praying for us here from Colombia, and look forward to being back next week in Louisiana.
All right. Well, welcome back here live in studio in Shreveport, Louisiana. Thank you for Pastor Tim sharing what he feels needs to be shared right now, all the way from Colombia. And I think those are pretty heavy topics for us to talk about. And the church at large is being exposed for their views on just the topic of Israel alone. And we're seeing here the reality of the lack of involvement, which has kind of led us to this place of where we're at in the church, of being involved in politics and or not. And obviously this comes off the heels of more than a generation of people just telling the church to stay out of it, and the idea of separation of church and state, where what the world says is the church needs to stay out of the state. In reality, Thomas Jefferson, and where that comes from, is reality of the state needs to stay out of the church. And the whole topic of Christian nationalism, it comes up from this. And so we're seeing churches be divided on this about what to do, and some have a very unhealthy, some have a very healthy view on this. But to get back to our topic here, we see the outcome of last week's meeting with President Trump and President Putin, and I want to play this video because it's kind of hilarious, where you see President Putin and President Trump walk up, and then you see this. Potential showing them, hey, this is our arsenal. This is what we can do. And supposedly they had a good meeting. There were a few topics. Secretary of State Marco Rubio came out and said, look, we have some negotiation points. And this is a good thing to come out of this. Obviously, there's a Ukrainian side who's very upset that these meetings happen. Pastor Tim talked about it, about how President Trump here is playing politics. You got to kind of come to the table. And before, there were no meetings like this with President Biden and his administration. Obviously, we know why. Don't want to go down that road. But what we're doing and what we're seeing from President Trump is he understands the players on the table at the board. And now today we're seeing reports of, and we've heard about it, and it's a big topic of the day, where European leaders are coming to the White House today. President Zelensky is scheduled to arrive at the White House later this afternoon. Really, as we start this, he's actually supposed to be there as we speak. And then we also see how there are European leaders here who are coming to offer in the NATO assurances and talk about NATO's side, because this is going to involve more than just Ukraine. It's going to talk about implications from Europe. So what we want to do, the reason I bring this up is we can dive into the weeds. I don't really want to do that. I want to bring just the highlights of this up and stick to a general overview, macro overview, and say, look, let's pray for President Trump. He literally has the weight of the world. And I titled today's episode, the world awaits POTUS' decision. And last week we talked about being in August is the valley of decision. And here we are, and we see the president sitting at a decision point, sitting at a place where he's going to have to make decisions that will affect the rest of the world. And there's, whether it be from the Ukraine-Russia, the economic issue, there's talks of stagflation, risks, and what it means to the world, other economies, because what the U.S. decides will affect the rest of the world. And so we just want to take a moment here and just, point out that President Trump needs people around him who are going to advise him properly. And as we see, as the swamp keeps getting drained, you see the swamp creatures continuing to arise. And so we just want President Trump, and if you remember back to President Zelensky's last meeting about how he just, in Trump's eyes, mocked him by, one, not wearing a suit. It's a small gesture, but then got confrontational and was demanding things that he was really not in a position to demand. And Pastor Tim talked about this a little bit, about how now that we're seeing these things kind of play out, what we see also is that Russia is, and we've known this, we've talked about this before, Russia sides with Iran, which is Hezbollah and Hamas, in a lot of these conflicts, and against Israel, which leads into Cindy Jacobs' word there about the small caveats of cells throughout the world. She talked about France in country. Obviously, we know about those here in the United States, whether it be Dearborn, Michigan, or even over there in Dallas, which is very close to us. And that kind of hits home. Oh, that can never happen in Texas. Texas is far red and we're never going anywhere. Well, look, they're under to change the way they rule. And you even have it in New York, and they use a lot of the ultra-Orthodox Hasidics, how they run and have their own separate kind of judicial system in New York City. And so they want their own Islamic courts, an Islamic system, and an Islamic police force. And so they're piggybacking off of that. And so just want to highlight that a little bit and pray for President Trump this moment. Obviously, there's a lot of people who don't want World War III. We would agree with that. And we just want to make sure that he's able to navigate this. One, for the safety of the men and women in Ukraine and Russia, multiple nations throughout there, possibly Europe. And as you're getting into winter, Europe's getting very nervous, where their negotiations with Russia kind of has an upper hand on them, because a lot of Europe is getting their energy sources from Russia. The Nord Stream pipeline, there's been talks of cutting it off, not renewing deals with the United States, but those things take time to get up and running. And so they have to kind of think about the moment right now, which is, okay, what are we going to winter? Because they have some brutal winters in Europe. And so there's a lot of things that are at play today that President Trump's going to have to wade through carefully. We just want to pray that he he keep his composure and his train of thought. And obviously he's been right on a lot of these issues. And Pastor Tim spoke about it a little bit about how, look, he's been, having all these wins, but we see through what happened. And able to pray that he keeps a level head, keeps in that place of humility, so that he can walk through and not have a pride, not be a son of pride, and help offer a solution to both Zelensky and Putin that are not only good for the world, but good for each people. Because if you look at Russia, they're taking people who are probably should not be in the military. And I mean, elderly, men, anybody who comes. There's a story, I say all that to say this, is there's this man who moved his family to Russia legally, and when he got there, Russia grabbed him and put him on the front lines because they're so desperate for soldiers. They're using North Korean soldiers that have been found. The rumor in findings of Chinese soldiers, Chinese weapons, North Korean weapons and stuff. They're stretching thin because they're burning through people. And so this is one of those things where, all right, each nation kind of has to come be held accountable. And there have been other prophetic words about how Putin's kind of on the clock here with the Lord. And so we just want to make sure President Trump wades through that, is able to advise both countries and then the rest of Europe about the solutions that are there, and then offer something that moves forward. Now, on the Israel front, I do want to share this, there is a rumor, this is something to pay attention to, that Hamas is letting its Egyptian and Qatari negotiators know that they want to agree to a ceasefire. Now, what is not fully known yet is what parts of the ceasefire do they agree to. What Israel has on the table in capacity within and the West Bank. We'll see if they fully agree to that. This is just coming out now as we see, as we went live here today. So we have to understand that and pray for the Israeli leaders, because even within Israel, they're having a fight. You have over this weekend, the hostages' families going on strike because it's been over 2 years and they want their family. Almost coming up on 2 years, I should say. They want their family members back. We've seen them emaciated, treated just like slaves within, what is it? My mind, World War II, Holocaust. They're treated like Holocaust soldiers in enslavement camps, internment camps, and skin and bones off of them, even though that's not happening. And then you see the stories, which was funny, that the BBC puts out, I think it's in here, where it talks about how there was the woman, a different one, where she was basically skin and bones like the Israeli hostage, but in reality she had leukemia. And then there's the story of the baby. And so it's hard to tell what's coming out of Gaza as a true story. Obviously, the way things are spun there, it's to manipulate and cause a stir within the worldwide media, and Americans, and American church is falling for it hook, line, and sinker, unfortunately, because it fits some agenda that they have and their quote-unquote theology. Take a step back from theology to a point and understand naturally is that if we look at the Middle East, Israel is our only ally there. So if we don't, as Americans, support Israel, what are we? They've said in their that Israel is Satan, and that America is the great Satan, and that once they wipe out Israel, they're going to come after the United States. And this tends to be ignored. This is written within their own charter. And so, and there's a big debate online, if you saw the Tucker Carlson interview with George Stephanopoulos' nun sister, who said, well, they don't want to attack Israel. They don't want to attack the United States. They've never said that. They've never done that. And it's very easy to pull up videos of their own leaders saying the very things that she said. from people. The Jews and the nation of Israel is innocent in everything they do, and everything they do is holy. Is that, look, they're going to be held account for their actions and their sins, but a lot of what they're doing is not necessarily a sin and or a crime, which is what they're claimed to be doing, of a humanitarian crisis, of them pulling aid, which Hamas takes, steals, and sells at an overinflated price. Okay, so we've covered that. Retouching on those things that Pastor Tim talked about, and then talking about the Cindy Jacobs word, something we really need to be aware of. And on that point is praying for the leaders in these areas, in these nations, have wisdom about how to deal with it. Because you're seeing it in the UK, the people themselves rise up because they're tired of it. Now the question is it too little too late, because you have a lot of those same type of immigrants who are within leadership who are allowing these things to happen. And they have other issues, but the question is can the UK be recovered? And as America, it's a prime example for us to look at and see, okay, look, this is what we don't want to happen to our nation. So we need to do something now to possibly prevent it and make sure that we have a country that continues to be built on faith, family, and freedom, which Mike Johnson says he's willing to stand up for and wanting to fight for. But you also have to have leaders who trying to get their own cut to get for their own people to kind of come alongside and understand this is with. Now, a lot of this leads up to the 2026 midterm elections, and I want to play this clip from Mike Johnson. This is an old clip, and the reason I want to play it is because this shows the type of leader that Mike Johnson is, but also this deals with the mail-in balloting issue. And if you saw over the weekend, this morning, President Trump put out a statement on Truth Social where he wants to put out an executive order to make mail-out ballotings illegal. And then he also wants to get rid of a lot of voting machines and go to paper-stamped ballots to help create, one, secure elections, but then also to speed up the time that bring results for the elections. So I want to play this. If you remember this clip, this is the most hilarious clip ever.
Any other state since the 19th century.
That's not true. The New York City Council voted more than 800,000 New York City's council, beginning January 9th, 2023, more than 800,000 non-citizens will be eligible to vote in municipal elections in New York. Do you agree with that policy?
No, nor non-citizens will not be eligible to vote in New York. They never have been. Well, they were in the 19th century eligible to vote in New York.
Well, no, this is a recent action. It was just passed in December.
No, that is not correct. Non-citizens have not been eligible to vote in New York, or as far as I know, in any other state since the 19th century.
That's not true. The New York City Council voted in December to allow this. It begins January 9, 2023. Cities in Vermont and Maryland already allow this, and similar measures are under consideration in Illinois, Maine, and Massachusetts right now.
If the gentleman will yield?
Yes.
I believe those are considerations of allowing votes in municipal elections only.
Right, but thank you. That's the point. Everybody wants to know at home, why would they allow this? Guys, they're allowing it because they're going to turn them into voters. They already are doing this in New York City, largest city in America, and this is the plan of our friends on this side to turn all the illegals into voters. That's it, folks. That's what's going on. That's the game. That's why the border's open. That's why they've dropped it. Look, I respect Ms. Lofgren and all her work in this arena. Yes, I'll yield, Mr. Chairman. I'd love to hear what you have to say about this.
As a New Yorker, I would love to think that New York is the entire country, but it is not. It is not, and consideration is being given to permitting non-citizens to vote in.
Okay, so I play that to kind of point out the hypocrisy, one, obviously we see on the left, but to the point of, this is an old clip, but you see the resolve from Speaker Johnson to stay calm when he sees Jerry Nadler wanting, he calmly lets him. That's right now is to let them speak, because every time they open up their mouth, they reveal their own agenda. And the reason I bring that up is because you have Democrats saying one thing, but then when you, as John talks about, you go 3 layers deep, you go deeper and deeper, you dig into what they're really talking about. They admit their own agenda to you publicly, that you can say, yes, you are agreeing with what I'm saying. And that's what happened to Mike Johnson there. And he did it calmly. And so we see this in the public. This is what he's also doing behind closed doors, to be rest assured and understanding that this is what's actually going on. And the reason I bring that story up is to highlight this story that comes out of, Eric, you can pull up my screen, is Trump issues update on future mail-in ballot voting machine and voting machines for 2026. And there's this video here at the top that talks about there's a ruling that came out of Mississippi to be considered to be the election day. So if it comes in late, then if it comes in the day after the election happened, so say November 2nd is the day, Tuesday, November 2nd is the day of election. If it comes in November 3rd, even if it's postmarked November 1st or November 2nd, it doesn't count. And what they said, and they used Justice Kavanaugh's own words in the final paragraph of their ruling, so that when it goes up and somebody appeals it, the Supreme Court will see, this is what their ruling. If I can pull that, if it'll play. No, let me go back to it. Let me refresh it. Basically, what it was saying, if I can pull it up here, is look, if they're going to be, yeah, here it is. Let me blow this up. As Justice Kavanaugh recently emphasized, to state the obvious, a state cannot conduct an election without deadlines. A deadline is not unconstitutional merely because the voters' own failures to take to ensure franchise-based vote counts. And does is with Trump pushing this forward, saying he's going to do an executive order, long term, that is not legal. That has no standing. Trump knows that. His goal wasn't to say, I'm going to push this through with the power of the pen. What he's doing is he's pushing it through. He knows it. He's pushing it through to make it a topic in a fight that somebody will take up, and that it will possibly get pushed to the Supreme Court before the midterms for them to allow it. Whether that happens or not, we'll see. If it doesn't get dealt with by the like Trump here. So this is a very wise strategy, and this is one of the things we're going to have to see, where do Democrats come across? Because one of the things that we're seeing is that Democrats are losing their base. We talked about last week how Mayor Pete, who's possibly running for presidential election, has 0% of the black vote, hardly any of the Hispanic vote. That has been a huge voting block for Democrats, which is very alarming for them to lose their base. Where are they going to make that up from? Mike Johnson talks about in that clip with Jerry Nadler. That will put them in office. Democrats hope some of the white vote, but they're losing all 3 because people, Americans, far and wide, left and right, they're standing on their principles saying, no, this is what we stand for. You guys are going further left. This is my left. Maybe you're right. If I'm not mirroring, Eric, this is my left, that's their right. Okay, so, and so you're left, my right. Democrats are going further and further away, and but they keep walking away from this. So this is something. Will Democrats double down on this? Will they allow the American vote to come in? And then will the court systems go back to one-day voting? It's hilarious. Every other nation in the world can do one-day voting, but America can't. The most industrialist, quote-unquote, civilized Western country in the world, and we can't do that. The implications for this will breed free and fair elections, not the notorious things that we're not allowed to talk about, where crimes and people keep getting caught. And this is out there for you to say, to understand this. I think we know what we're all talking about, but I have to be careful because we are on YouTube. But you can watch us on Rumble and Facebook, and we're going to start putting this up on podcast, so you can go back and watch it for those who like to watch via replay. Okay, last thing, and then we'll get to some behind the scenes here of things that are going on, is we have, this is not really being talked about that much, but sharing my screen. Okay, let me share my screen. Jerome Powell is in Jackson Hole, Wyoming this week to discuss inflation and the buoy of jobs. And ultimately, he's caught in the middle where the Fed chairs, the St. Louis Fed chairs are meeting, and they're discussing the recent economic reports that have come out from the different federal Fed chair offices. And ultimately, what they're going to be discussing is whether to lower interest rates in September or not. And this is kind of something that I take a keen interest in because it's my area of interest and study in undergrad, but it's also something that tells us the state of the economy. And obviously you see Trump, and the reason I want to bring this up is Trump is trying to pressure and is getting into a public spat with Jerome Powell about whether it's right or wrong to lower interest rates. The numbers that are out there from the CBO are that it would eliminate upwards of $300 billion in interest that are accruing right now from the federal government's debt. That would be a good thing. The concern that Powell has, and the flip side, which is that Trump saying, the economy's rolling, we're picking up steam, we're getting all these investments. The key thing on that is these investments are long-term. They're great, but it's going to take time to bring manufacturing to America, get the jobs installed, get the people installed, and get the factories up and running. That's going to take time. So long-term, Trump is right. Short-term, Powell wants to make sure, because there is a University of Michigan report that is a consumer report where consumers kind of chime in and say what they think about the state of the economy. And it keeps going lower and lower and lower. I think it's now at 39%, whereas earlier in the year it was in the 40s. And so the fact that it's getting lower, where people are seeing that the economy in their eyes are getting worse, because in their eyes, gas is still high, eggs are still high, groceries are still high, which means if your gas is still high, your electric bills are still high, and leading into almost everything else, if your gas is still high, because it basically covers your initial cost of production and transportation for said products to the grocery store. And you're also seeing the car market kind of go down, housing market go down a little bit. And now the flip side of that, the housing market kind of dwindles down. You're allowing your first-time home buyers to come back in, which is a good thing per se. But if they lower interest rates, you're going to jack up. What's going to happen is you're going to see an influx. Okay, now you have higher interest rates, housing prices are going down. If interest rates go down, people are going to jack back up their housing prices, especially new home builders, because the supply doesn't reach the demand that is there right now. And so what we're looking at here with Jerome Powell is he's waiting for what we can consider in the economics world, these lagging indicators, to come in before he makes his decision. He says it's a solid economy, but he wants to make sure, because what he's looking at is jobs reports, and what he's seeing is that the private sector jobs just aren't there. And what you see is in the Wall Street Journal, you have CEOs over the past year bragging about cutting jobs, increasing the use of AI, and using less people in the workforce to cut costs to save their companies, because costs of things are still high. And then when you come into the world of tariffs, this is where you could see a increased cost of your goods. Now, will that be offset by manufacturing things here stateside? That's yet to be determined. And I say all this to say, I'm trying to give both sides here of the argument, is Jerome Powell wants to make sure that if he does lower the rates, it doesn't shock the system. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, if we're looking at what the Fed is doing, should do, is what would a free market, free of the Federal Reserve, do? What would the banking system do if they had no Federal Reserve? That's the ultimate question of where Trump could kind of say, hey, look, this is what needs to be happening, of whether interest rates need to be lowered. And so, because he comes from an old Democratic mindset of it's okay that the Fed's there, and I know there's a lot of libertarians who say get rid of the Fed, and I'm not saying I disagree with that fully, but we live in a system where the Fed does control interest rates. And the reality is right now you have a Federal Reserve chair who is completely comfortable not being shown as a puppet of Trump. And he has a possible 2 more years legally to stay in office. So this is one of those things where we talked about with Putin and Zelensky, where we want to pray for humility for President Trump. This is the same example, because he's already getting into public spouts with Jerome Powell. We played the video of him and Jerome Powell getting into a public fight in front of cameras about the cost and what the cost is of the new Federal Reserve building and redoing the Federal Reserve and getting it up to date. That doesn't bode well for their relationship. And obviously Trump's kind of made it known he's already got his man picked out. This kind of pushed somebody out who needed to be pushed out within the Federal Reserve chairs. And why is this important, you ask? Because this will affect the economy. This will affect people. And the bottom line is what we need to see, and hopefully the benefit from this for Trump is that we can get Americans to realize, one, we need to stop living on credit, because the increase of delinquencies on 30 and 60-day credit card loans and loans in general is starting to rise, meaning people's credit card debt, consumer debt, is starting to rise. They're paying for things such as DoorDash with credit with a company called Klarna. This is disastrous. And I bring this out because you have, your millennials, your Gen Zs claiming housing is affordable, life's not affordable. Well, it's not necessarily about whether it's affordable. It's about the decisions that you make with the finances that you do have, quote unquote, being a good steward. And, it's funny, our reading plan today and yesterday talked about in 1 Timothy 5, where if you don't provide for your house, you're no better than an unbeliever. And then in 1 Timothy 6, it goes on to talk about those who gain wealth, what they should do with it, which is to be, one, good stewards, but then to be generous with the wealth that the Lord has provided for them to steward. And so we have to look at this and say, okay, despite the economy, despite all these things that are going on, as if the borrower is slave to the lender, which we see in Proverbs 22, is if we're not a borrower, then we don't have to play into these games and these fights that are going on. Now, that's hard for the American consumer outside the United States. They understand this quite clearly because they don't get involved in the credit racket here that the United States and U.S. citizens do. And the reason I bring this up is because this will be a contention point for the 2026 midterms and then coming into 2028. And we see how fickle the economy is with 2019 and 2020 with the COVID crisis, leading into 2021 and 22, where you have kind of a downturn and increased inflation, increased costs of goods. And the reality is a lot of that was started off the back of heels of Trump. And if Trump's not careful, if there's another planned pandemic or there's another planned something, and he allows these things to happen, where the Federal Reserve can do things, or somebody like a Fauci could come in. Hopefully he doesn't. But I bring that up is to say that we need to pray for Trump's humility in this situation. One, with Israel, obviously, but with Russia and Ukraine, and then more importantly, here in the United States, because we'll find out Friday when Powell gives his speech that will most likely indicate that in September they may or may not lower interest rates. And then Trump's going to get mad, and he's going to come out and attack Powell. And what is that going to do if he does that? Is it going to cause Powell to sink in and do something that would harm the economy long term by letting us stay? And then the question is for Trump is, how can he look at this to help the consumer? Does he need to, rather than push Powell, push Congress to kind of get his act together and pass a budget bill? should Congress start looking at other ways for them to be more fiscally responsible? And one of the best things Trump's doing is trying to lower the overall deficit, the yearly deficit and the budget, and then shrink the size of government. Those are two foundations that are key for any economic recovery, and he's doing them, and he needs to continue to do them. And there's a lot of, we talked about this before, there's a lot of positions that build and ultimately gotten rid of, federal departments that need to get rid of, the Doge, being implemented in the budgets. These are all things that Trump could be focusing on, but he's focusing, and he's not wrong to focus on lowering the federal interest rates. But the reality is how he goes about it. And I wanted to play that Mike Johnson clip of this is how you deal with things. He's doing it right with Putin. And I think one thing that Trump's struggling with is, and I was listening to they talked about how when you have an ally, you tend to kind of be off-put by them thinking for themselves and doing something that necessarily you wouldn't agree with because they have a different perspective and they want to offer, and I think you're seeing, they want to offer their own perspective and being seen as independent, not a tool or a puppet by you. You're seeing that with Jerome Powell. You're seeing that with Amy Coney Barrett and a bunch of other, and you saw it with Bill Barr in the last administration where they're trying to put their own identity and their own stamp in things and hold mistake. In this instance, Trump, he doesn't have recourse other than a possible impeachment to try to get Jerome Powell removed. Legally, Jerome Powell is in there. Now, Trump can pick somebody for after, hopefully, if there's given enough time before the end of his 2027 term in 2028, which then opens the door for whatever, as you're seeing Democrats angle for that. And the reality is Trump needs to be wise in these situations, during these negotiations and during these talks, because he's kind of up a creek without a paddle on this, and the Fed chair is mostly independent, but Congress, this is where Congress kind of needs to put the pressure on and say, hey, what are you seeing? These are the questions that President Trump should be asking. What are you seeing that shows you to hold interest rates higher? Let me clarify it for you. And maybe Powell has a good answer for it. Because he kind of does. When you look at the jobs numbers, the non-farm payrolls, they're not rising that much, meaning a lot of the increases of the job reports are coming. Private sector isn't. The CEOs are going on Wall Street Journal and bragging about cutting jobs and increasing AI to cut costs to save, which increase stock market shares. And so you're kind of seeing this Trump's taking credit for things that in the long run, what does that hold? What does that mean? Now, obviously you're in a season of transition where high labor costs, bringing in AI, robotics, it does create different jobs. It's going to and other opportunities for people. Hopefully jobs can help with that. Most of them don't, but there will be most likely local municipality and state government incentives to help that because they want to help bring jobs to their people and the markets that they're in. So there's a lot at play here. I say all that to say is this is an issue where Trump has got to lay down his pride, and that's what we want to pray for. That President Trump hear the Holy Spirit, hear his advisors who are around him, and or that there is an advisor around them who can say, hey, let's try to look at this through Jerome Powell's lens. Where is he right? Where might he be wrong? Where can we bring what we believe to be right and bring about a solution that will be one, not just short-term positive for the American people, because this is what Jerome Powell wants to prevent. Okay, you get a spike, but then you let things go out of control. Obviously, we're long overdue for a correction, but the reality is can Trump navigate this on the economic front? He's been right on the tariffs so far, and a lot of them are docking him and knocking on him for continuing to kind of back down on China, even though he went from 14% tariffs to up towards 30% tariffs on China. So he has increased it. He has won there. And to those who are trying to push Trump down is, well, he went for 90% or 400%, 135%. He's only down to, 30, 35 now. Well, that's an increase of what it was. And that's his strategy. And so that's the art of the deal. So with that, I just want to close with that and then give you guys an opportunity, if Eric could, kind of show some lights and show some behind the scenes. And we're going to release a video about a lot of things we've been doing around here. So, Eric, if you want to pan around, just grab a camera. We'll show you some behind the scenes here about what it looks like in here, just so you know what all your investment and your sewing has gone into here with our studio, and let you know what we have to work with here. So today I'm flying solo. And we have this whole wall that we put up this brick to give us a lot of options. And what we'll use this for is kids ministry, youth ministry. Obviously, what we're doing here today, Pastor John has some ideas. Scott has some ideas for Olive. And then we have this bookshelf, and which is a representation of a lot of different offices here that we can do a lot of different things with. And we're still building it out, putting things together. And then on the other side, we have a similar bookshelf, just a different color. It's kind of hard to see there, Eric. We'll turn on the lights here real quick so you guys can see this kind of behind the scenes look here. Excuse the mess as we continue to build out. Doing some other scenes. If you saw our service Sunday, Eric did almost live there. And then obviously some Jesus Chicken here. And then we have this back corner here where we'll do another set with some sound panels and things. So just wanted to show you guys this a little bit to say thank you for sewing and pouring into this ministry, this media ministry that we have, and pouring into Pipeline, because your sewing for the past several years has enabled us to do this, to be able to reach those, and on this instance, on this podcast, and this show on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, where we are able to kind of bring a different perspective about, okay, not necessarily our opinions, but what is the Lord saying? How can we pray for our leaders? Be more like a Reese Howell, and understanding that there are situations and times and seasons where the enemy wants to come against you, like in Daniel 7:25, to wear out the saints. But how can we bring about hope for believers, and then also have them understand, as Ephesians talks about, and which is our motto here, of making everyone a minister, and understanding that you have the opportunity to be involved and engage, one, with the Holy Spirit, but then in your culture and your life. Because if you didn't recognize this, the topic that Cindy Jacobs gave a warning about, the Islamic communities rising and cells rising around the country, is they're getting involved. So the question is what are we going to do to kind of push back against that? So I want to thank each and every one of you for following along today. Pastor Tim will be back next week. We'll be in here in studio. And tomorrow we have noon prayer. We'll let you guys know if we're going to do it in here or in the main auditorium for those locally who want to join, as we'll have our Olive students joining with us in the crowd as they get ready to start joining us on stage and praying for things that the Lord is showing John, Lori, and Karen. And then we'll be back Wednesday night as well, continuing to talk about that, entering that place of peace and dealing with those pride issues that we need to lay down so that we don't become sons of pride. So with that, blessings to each and every one of you. We'll put the replay up on Facebook for those who want to go back and watch it, and then we're on YouTube at The Pipeline Report and on Rumble at The Pipeline Report as well. So blessings, and we'll see you guys later.